So when I first started doing hybrids, we were not doing zirconia as the predominant restoration. We were doing a cast bar with denture teeth on top. And that was before any of this real technology was available. So we would take a physical impression. We would take that physical impression, put it in and pour it up and turn it into the stone that everyone is used to seeing. And then you have to connect that with a very strong plastic bar, if you will. The lab will make you a strong plastic bar. They cut it in a specific way where they're each individual. Give it back to you. You put it into the patient and you re-glue it back together inside that patient to reinsert. It's called a verification jig. You do the verification jig to make sure that those implants are exactly where your impression said it was. You then take an impression over that. You go and you can take an impression over that. But you would take that back to the model. You would look for any differences. You cut that out of the stone, re-pour stone in that particular area and you kind of would guess, right? Because if you did 4 implants and one was off, you had to have somebody that really knew what they were doing to tell which one was the one that was off, because one is going to throw the whole system, and you have to have that eye for really which one is the one that didn't make it correctly. But long story short, when you would finally get to the end, that was just done by hand and by stone, and stone expands and contracts and expands and contracts and has different levels of accuracy. And so the result wasn't that accurate, to the point that when we would do a zirconia off of that type of way, you almost had to wince and be a little bit concerned as you were tightening these screws in. There was a chance that they would be off enough that it would break the zirconia. And that's even with, and we still use titanium bases for a pretty specific reason, but that's even with titanium bases holding the screws in, which gives you a little bit of play. Isn't that the intention? That's the intention of the titanium bases. Was there's a metal piece that's touching the abutment. There's cement that's kind of your fudge factor, and then there's this unforgiving zirconia. And the problem was, even in the most controlled scenario, when you screw that in, there would be enough off that you could break that cement, which was better than breaking the teeth, but it would be broken loose and it would be floating the entire time. So then with the advent of photogrammetry, we were able to instantly have a digital file that gave us that really close estimate, or that really close number of where that implant sat, which allows you to seat zirconia with repeatability and a peace of mind, etc.
Passively, have it fit passively.
Yeah.
And the analog way too, if everything doesn't line up, not only can you fracture the zirconia, but you're putting stress on the implant as well for the longevity of it. And
wonderful.
You're going to get bone loss.
And that could be a whole nother 5-hour conversation, but that's the reason why I hate the zirconia bridges on top of the implants, is you can impart internal stress into those bridges, into those teeth, into those implants, and get a killing of the bone because there's too much pressure in one direction or another that ultimately the patient doesn't see until it's too late. And so the reason why we're in hybrids and the reason why we do the cases with the gum tissue and all of that is because when you assemble it all and you assemble the machinery and you assemble the accuracy, you get that very repeatable good result that you don't have to wake up at night and think, oh man, Mrs. Smith, I hope that her implants are okay. Like, you know that they're tied to that implant.
When did you switch over to photogrammetry?
So that's part of the story as well. So we got into zirconia and we started to switch over off of the analog into photogrammetry. We started in, I would say, 2017, 2018, right about when we met. And I remember I had negotiated a deal with ICAM, with Horace, for maybe 3 or 4 of them. We had 3 or 4 offices. And Dr. David, my business partner, was talking to PIC Dental. And unbeknownst to me, when I showed up on Monday, I wanted to give him the numbers for the ICAM. I was all excited about it. And he said, oh, you owe me this much for the PICs that I just ordered, because we just bought 4 of them. So that was already committed and down the road. So we went down PIC, and this isn't to bash PIC, but their flags are made of plastic, and they're very, very big. So it's really hard in surgery to get the pictures of them. And you also can't determine whether or not they're deformed or not, truly. You kind of almost have to open a new package every time. But even then, patient accidentally bites down and deforms it. What are you going to do? You wouldn't be able to see it. And so PIC, and it also has 2 cameras. PIC was really hard for acquisition. It was really hard on the patient. It was really hard for consumables and changing out those plastic pieces. And so I had a really, really bad first experience with photogrammetry. Such that when I separated and moved on my own, circa 2019, 2020, I didn't do any photogrammetry. We went back to verification jigs because I was convinced that photogrammetry didn't work because of my bad experience. And then finally, over time, I forget what was the scenario, but that's when I went back into iPic or iCam. iPic is a movie theater right here. I went to the iCam because their flags are much more accurate, but they're made of metal. They can be reused. They're not disturbed by patients. The acquisition is good. And maybe in the future we end up with a micron mapper, but it's one of those things that has 1,000 different parts to it, right? Why we use it and what solution isn't always the answer. There's what goes into it for the patient's experience, what goes into it for the cost, what goes into it for the new computers you need to buy. Does it fit into the software? There's a lot of the things that kind of go into that whole ecosystem. And part of dentistry, there are some places that sort of make it Apple, where the ecosystem is on the iOS platform. And that's cool at first, but then you're limited. And like so you want to grow out. Yeah, Zircon's on.
Yep.
And so, it's all fascinating stuff.